More breaking news this hour as terror arrests happen in New York City. Two women pledging allegiance to ISIS arrested for plotting to allegedly use weapons of mass destruction here in Manhattan. We think we were somewhere in the United States. The arrest happened here in New York City. In the meantime, we have a disturbing new report on the number of foreign fighters joining Islamic terror groups. According to the UN, the number of fighters leaving home to join ISIS and al-Qaeda has spiked 71% over the last year. Some 25,000 more then are heading to hundreds of different countries to join in the jihad. Ben Collins is an Army Special Forces veteran, beret officer with 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. And Ben, I think you bring up a really interesting point. The proximity of this fight, of wanting to get involved in jihad, if you want to join a terror group, is more accessible now than ever before, than it was in Afghanistan. Tell our viewers a little bit about that.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, the concept of foreign fighters isn't new. We certainly saw it in the 80s and the 90s when a lot of foreign fighters came from places like Saudi Arabia, right? I think we should mention that probably the most infamous foreign fighter that we became accustomed with, who cut his teeth, so to speak, on the battlefields of Afghanistan, was bin Laden himself. And getting to Afghanistan, even then, was a difficult journey. The jihadists, or the jihadist wannabe of today, especially the ones that are coming from some of the European nations. But I mean, we've seen that all somebody has to really do is to get to Turkey. There's the border is about 560 miles long. It's extremely porous. There's no way for them to monitor the entirety of the border, so it's fairly simple for individuals to get to Turkey and then make their way into Syria and link up with the jihadist groups for their training.
And what a reminder today as well, Ben, that we have these arrests in New York City, that it's not even wannabe terrorists, if you will, going to the battlefront, that it's happening here at home as well. What do we do about it?
Look, it certainly is. I mean, so the early reports from what I saw, that they had some rudimentary materials. But look, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Al-Qaeda overall publishes a magazine every once in a while called Inspire Magazine. One of the most famous articles that they published in that magazine was literally titled, "Make a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom." And that article, we are fairly certain, was part of the material that the Tsarnaev brothers used in the Boston Marathon bombing. Individuals these days, because of the internet, they're able to be recruited and trained in their living rooms. They can be inspired in their kitchens, reading this stuff online. So while on the one hand, it makes it extremely difficult for law enforcement and intelligence agencies to be able to track. The reality is, with the explosion of social media, both these individuals that have traveled to Syria and the individuals here at home, they're very prolific on their social media sites. So they're almost showing us the way that they work, network.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Let me just interrupt you there, because I want our viewers to know that one of the arrests in New York City, one of the women apparently published a poem in the Inspire magazine, as you mentioned, as far back as 2009. So she's just getting arrested now. Obviously, she's been watched for several years. I was reminded by one of our guests during our first hour of Happening Now, Ben, that when bin Laden planned and executed the attacks on 9/11, Al-Qaeda was an organization of about 400 people. And now look at it. Look at this report just in the last year of how it's ballooned. You've been part of our strategy, militarily and tactically, to snuff out terrorism. What do you think we need to do different in the coming decade so that it doesn't continue to grow?
Well, look, I have the utmost respect for our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement, and it is a very difficult job. However, anybody that's worked in that environment knows that it's very difficult for interagency sharing of information. So, not just, I think we have to get much better from a federal intelligence perspective, sharing their information with the states and the law enforcement in a very timely fashion. But it also now goes to the point of, we need to work with our allies, certainly in Europe, and ensure that intelligence network is constructed. The information is out there. We have the tools in our possession that we can track these individuals. But it all comes down to actually having actionable intelligence at the right time.
And what about combating the ideology that you mentioned that is so prolific on social media, that obviously is so seductive to so many? What do we do about that?
Well, look, there's a cycle of these individuals, for them to actually become radicalized, right? And part of that, I think, it's incumbent on the community and certainly on the families to keep an eye on, on their kids, on what they're looking online. There is a struggle, and there's certainly a struggle for a lot, I think, in the Muslim communities. I think it should be said. I think a lot of these individuals, or some of these individuals, saw the horrors that were occurring in Syria under the dictator Assad, and almost felt this very idealistic draw to actually go help their brothers. And I think, unfortunately, once they get there, what starts as idealism ends up as terrorism because they get so radicalized while they're there. But look, it really is going to come down to that at the micro level, communities and families actually paying attention to what their kids are doing online, and actually having these discussions in these homes to just talk about the realities of it. Look, war sounds romantic, but these kids get over there, and there's nothing romantic to it.
Well, all important reminders, Ben. Thank you very much for that. We just want to add to this, John, as we turn to the Iran negotiations as well. The #1 state sponsor of terror is Iran. And we can't forget that as we continue to talk about the nuclear negotiations and what's taking place.